Don't pause, press play.
What's up, you guys? It's Jono. Today we're gonna add another controller to my massive controller collection. We are getting a new Pro controller for the Nintendo Switch. This thing also doubles as a Bluetooth controller for other platforms, but I bought it just to use as a Nintendo Switch controller because my Pro controller got drift and I did not want to spend all that money on another Pro controller just for it to get drift. So I told myself, you know what, let's just unbox a new controller and see if a cheaper one can get the job done. And I gotta say, you guys, this thing is very, very impressive. Let's get it unboxed here and I'll show it off. This is nearly identical to the Pro controller for the Nintendo Switch, but it is 1/3 of the cost and it has fancy LED lights on it. Once we get it plugged in, I'll show off all the features, and there's a turbo button on the back, so that's pretty convenient too. Now, when you look at this thing, it does look identical to a Pro controller, and when I bust out the Pro controller and do a side-by-side here in just a second, you'll realize this thing is identical to a Pro controller. It has a few upgrades over the Pro controller, and there's a few things that are not as good as the Pro controller as well, but for 1/3 the price, that's exactly what you would expect. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this thing. It does have LED rings around the joysticks. I bought it for that reason. I thought that was a great feature. I'm really happy about that feature, and I'll show you how to change the colors in just a second. It has all the buttons that you would expect like a Pro controller has. It's nearly identical in the shape and size to a Pro controller. I'm really, really happy with how identical to a Pro controller it actually is. Now, in order to change the LED lights, you can see them changing there. You push the turbo button on the back and you click down the joystick. It's not too hard to push these at the same time. You just have to squeeze and then they push. And of course, you can change through all of the different colors of the rainbow, or you can choose rainbow colored and just go with the rainbow color, which is where I'm gonna leave it because that's why I bought it. I'm very, very excited about this controller, you guys. I've already been playing with it for about a week and it plays exactly identical to a Pro controller. It's exactly the experience I was hoping for, a fraction of the cost without any loss in quality. One thing I will say is that the Pro controller buttons click just a little bit smoother. There's just something about them, they feel smooth. The Pro controller just has a very smooth feel on the buttons, and the controller here that I just got is very clicky. I don't know how to say it better than that. When you click it, it snaps. You can really hear it snap and the button clicks right back up immediately. I don't think that it's better or worse than the Pro controller. It just feels different, but I'm guessing it does the exact same thing. It's just a difference in the feel of the quality of the controller. This controller also has a non-slip binding, so if you get a lot of controller sweat in your hands, just like I do, if you're a sweaty hardcore player, then you really need to get a controller that has a non-slip binding, and I don't really like the Switch controller. It just has a slippery feel to it. I really don't like that. This one has the non-slip binding, and even though it's a cheaper controller made from cheaper materials, it really feels better in the hand and you don't notice the controller sweat as bad, and it's easier to dry it off and get it really clean, whereas I find it really difficult to clean the Pro controller. So that's a really big difference. Now let's go ahead and get this thing synced. It's not too hard to get it synced for the first time. I did do a controller review for a different controller recently, and I found that one just a tiny bit easier to sync than this one. This one is the same controls though, and it's the same instructions. So you're gonna use the home button and the Y button to turn it on. So you push those two buttons to turn on the controller. That's interesting because you don't have to do that on the Pro controller, but you do seem to have to do it on all the third-party controllers. So once you get it on, you can hit the pairing button and it should just go into pairing mode. And if you're on the controller grip screen, like you can see I'm already on that screen, then it should just pair it up nice and easy. I did have to try a couple of times before I got it to actually work, but after a couple of tries, I did get it to pair. Now, one thing I will say is it's not super easy to get this thing to repair with your device. I had a couple of times where I turned on the Switch and it didn't want to find the controller and I had to push some buttons to get it to find the controller. That's kind of like the worst case scenario. You want it to just pair every single time. I reviewed a Super Nintendo controller that looks identical to an old Super Nintendo controller. That was my previous video. That thing pairs every time I turn it on. It even pairs with my phone every time I turn it on. This one, I did have one situation the other day where I turned on my Switch and it wasn't paired. I didn't have to go and repair the whole thing. I didn't have to redo the entire process, but I did have to click the buttons about 5 or 6 times before it finally decided to pair, and I really couldn't figure out what was going on, so that was a tiny bit frustrating. I did see comments like that in the reviews on Amazon, so I will say maybe that's a little tiny bit of an issue on this controller, but overall for the cost, with that being the only tiny issue that I experienced, and maybe there's a way to get around it that I just don't know yet, hey, that's not too big of a deal. So let's go ahead and dive into some actual gameplay and just look at how the controller plays. You can see that the rainbow lights around the joysticks just look awesome. That's just a really good feeling to have those looking so cool. I wish that there was upgrades like that on the Pro Controller, but there's not, so this is one of those things that you just can't get from the Pro Controller. I was very, very happy with the LEDs on those. They don't look that bright on the video, but they're actually quite bright in person, so I like them for that reason. Now the controller holds up really, really well during intense gameplay. You guys know I'm a Pokemon Unite fanatic. I love the game and I'm playing some very advanced characters, including Zero Aura, and you have to be able to do very precise button motions, very precise buttons in order. It's really, really precise, all right? I can't stress that enough. You have to push the buttons in exactly the right order, and I've been able to do it with this controller, no problems whatsoever. So I will say the controller isn't really a big migration from the Pro Controller. It feels just about the same. The actual size of it is exactly the same. You could see in the side-by-side, it's literally exactly the same. The feel of the buttons is a little bit different, but it's not much to get used to because they're in exactly the same place because it's exactly the same size. So it's really just the feel of the clickiness of them, not that big of a change. So yeah, it's not really an adjustment to get used to this controller. I found it to be nearly identical to the experience of the Pro Controller. Alright you guys, so we pretty much said everything that there was to say about the controller. I'm really excited to show this off for you. I was really skeptical that this controller would be good enough quality to even bring to my channel and show you guys. Obviously, it's 1/3 of the price of a Pro Controller, so how could it possibly be as good as a Pro Controller, right? Okay, well, it was really as good as a Pro Controller. I had no issues. There were some things that were even better than the Pro Controller, especially that price. So I will say, if your Pro Controller gets drift, like my Pro Controller got drift, don't replace it with another Pro Controller. I just don't think that that's ethically the right thing to do for Nintendo to keep on making controllers that make drift. They shouldn't have drift. For as expensive of a controller as that is, it should not have any drift. I think it's totally unacceptable and I won't stand for it as a consumer, so I decided to step outside the box, try out a different controller and see if it's able to offer the same quality that I expect, and surprisingly it is. It's a really good controller. That's why I decided to make this video and tell you guys about it. Stop wasting $80 on a Pro Controller when you could get just as good of a controller and it won't cost you as much, and honestly it's a good experience with the controller. I had nothing bad to say about the controller and I've been playing with it for about a week or so and I've had no issues. It feels exactly the same as the Pro Controller to me, so I really enjoyed this experience and I recommend it to everybody out there. Alright everybody, that's going to be the end for my video. Thank you so much everybody for watching. I truly appreciate you guys taking the time to check out my video. Thanks again to my amazing subscribers and peace!